Huh? So, as part of this journey, Som, right, what have been some of your key challenges, and how have you, overcome those challenges?
Okay. I'll break it down into I'll break it down into the let's say the technology related pieces, which frankly were easier, and then the user and the stakeholder related, which are more difficult. So from a typical perspective, I mean, we obviously were working with the transformer based, solutions even before ChatGPT happened. So we had some sense of it, but now obviously it's now mainstream. But again, take a step back. The point that I made earlier with an LLM, especially if you're talking, ChatGPT works because hey, the amount of risk and liability, etc., that they have is very relatively less. Now, if you as an enterprise
Mm,
are putting a solution out there and you're representing other enterprises, the amount of accuracy that you need is fairly high in terms of the responses. So you cannot have hallucination, you cannot have bias, you cannot have toxicity. You have to basically make sure that from when the agent is actually responding to a question, it is representing what the end enterprises wanted accurately. So technical solutions or build related solutions in terms of hallucination was a key problem. um, we've sidestepped that using things like obviously fairly strong guardrails. Guided using the examples, dynamic and static examples. So we've kind of got our hallucinations down, but that was one major thing that we started off with. Bias, toxicity, other aspects as well. You don't And in this case, most of the time, the model is not biased. But what you're trying to do is the user might actually ask a biased question. Is this job good for an Asian male? You don't want to reinforce that bias. So it needs to know
mm,
that, it needs to recognize the bias and sidestep it and then effectively do that. Toxicity, frankly, depends upon, overall quality, etc., etc. Not a real problem. And I think toxicity detection is there. But we've been very conscious about this from an implementation perspective right from the start. We actually have 3 4 layers of uh, where it's basically real. Obviously, you're preventing it through your mechanisms. Real time, you're detecting it. Then we actually have a model for the transcript analysis, and then we have the human audit. So we've been very focused on the compliance and these aspects,
mm,
probably rightly so, because now the EUA Act is also enforced. Latency has been a problem up until very recently.
mm, mm.
That's why one of the first use cases we started off was on WhatsApp, because WhatsApp by definition is asynchronous, so it was less of a problem. That's
Okay.
WhatsApp. But
Uh,
latency has been, for at least what we've seen in terms of the endpoints from the models that we're using, definitely way higher than what you would expect in a typical web setup. But now with GPT-4 Omni, obviously latency is less of a problem. Cost also now less of a problem. GPT-4 Omni is, I think a factor of 6 or 7 lower than what GPT 3 or GPT-4 was at some point. Now prices have been falling. I think it's going to keep falling more because now obviously you have the likes of Llama 3.1 and other equally good open source models coming in. But in terms of from
yeah.
a technology perspective, in the interest of time, so there are a number of things that you have to take care of, which you would not. So these are the additional things to take care of compared to building a typical software piece. So these are some challenges to overcome. But I'll tell you my biggest challenge, and I think this is going to be true for everyone, is overcoming the user perception. The users have been used to chatbots of the yesteryears, which were not really smart. They do not trust the bot to be able to handle complex scenarios. I saw this, 4 years back with when we were doing with NatWest as well. I'm seeing this now. The user education and getting the user to actually understand what all the assistant is capable of, and to the
Mm,
extent to which it can be helpful, I think is a big challenge that we are trying to do it. So user education, and then to a lesser extent in my case, but I keep talking to my colleagues in the industry, there's an element of the stakeholder management as well. In my case, I've been fairly lucky. Most of my stakeholders come, with a fairly good understanding of what AI is capable of and what it should be. But I've seen many scenarios where, again, going back to the yesteryears, oh, we can't start off because we don't have labeled data. Might not be the case over here. Pick your use case. You might actually have a fairly large pre-trained model which does not need labeled data to start off and do your V0. Get your user uptake. Get a sense of, is this a product market fit possible? Then invest in terms of the labeled data part of it. So there's an element of a stakeholder management, which is less of a problem. There's an element of typical implementation with the stochastic models, etc., which is another problem. But I think from a product perspective, in my mind, the biggest challenge is to kind of get the user educated and build that equation with the user so that they are able to use the agents to the maximum possible. Even for me, it took
Absolutely.
a while before I got to the using chat GPT to its full extent. I used to ask questions. Now I don't use Google for any kind of search. I will go to chat GPT because it gives me a context, it gives me a full information. So I think user education is the biggest challenge from my perspective.
No, that's a great point, right? And I've also built products, right, where we realize that how you introduce a AI product to your users, right? That strategy has often had more bearing as opposed to the quality of the model,
Yeah,
right? You can still build the greatest AI system, but if you have not introduced it in the right way, if you have not set the right expectations with the users, things can grossly go wrong.
yeah, yeah. And especially where the users have had the experience of the previous technology, they've almost level set themselves saying, oh, this is what I will use this for. To overcome and to retrain that behavior, I think is, in my mind, the biggest product challenge.
Absolutely, right? Because this is a step change for everyone, right? And not just for the builders, not just for the industry, but also for the user.